Good morning, and welcome to day 257 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we continue looking at the book of Revelation by zooming in on chapters 2 and 3. And whereas chapter 1 was an introduction to Jesus, the faithful witness who was dead but is now alive forevermore, the first and the last, the living one, Chapter 1 shows Jesus' power, and chapter 2 shows Jesus' perspective. Jesus not only has power over the world, he has the right perspective on his churches. And so chapters 2 and 3 involve 7 letters to 7 different churches in his kingdom. And it's interesting to me, these churches all exist within the Roman Empire, and yet Jesus doesn't say the exact same thing to each of them. Isn't that neat? We often think, I've seen this as a guest preacher. So many times I've tried to prepare a faithful word for a church that I was going to as a guest speaker, but I didn't know the situations and circumstances of that church. So the message was not as effective as it might have been if I really knew what the church was going through, what they were walking through in that season. And even though all of these churches are in the Roman Empire, which had pockets of persecution, it wasn't affecting all of the churches equally, and they were not all responding in the same way. So it should be a great comfort, but also a great challenge that Jesus not only knows what we're going through generally, Jesus knows what we're going through and how we're responding specifically. In fact, in writing to these 7 churches, the only churches to which Jesus offers no word of correction are those where the hostility, the persecution, and the suffering are most pronounced. It's precisely where those things are going well that Jesus says, yeah, but you might work on this. So I just want to hit 3 broad points, 2 of which I've already alluded to. Number 1, in Revelation 2 and 3, as you work your way through these letters, notice that Jesus knows the unique circumstances and responses of each of his churches. Number 2, notice that Jesus does not always have the same perspective on those situations and circumstances that we might be tempted to have. So, for example, you see a church, in fact, the first church to which he writes is the letter to the church at Ephesus. And by the way, notice how each of the letters contains, in the introduction of the letter, contains references in describing Jesus back to chapter 1. It's linking that power with that perspective. So in the letter to the church at Ephesus, Jesus is the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Things seem to be going well at Ephesus. He says, I know your works, your labor, and your endurance, that you cannot tolerate evil people. You have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and you have found them to be liars. They don't endure false teaching, which is something he addresses in multiple letters. I know that you have persevered and endured hardships for the sake of my name, and you have not grown weary. But one thing I have against you, you have abandoned the love that you had at first. Even where churches are doing well, Jesus not only looks on our external circumstances, he looks on our internal condition, the love in our hearts, or whether we're going through the motions and drifting away from that. You also see this, I like the contrast between Smyrna, which is one of the 2 very persecuted churches to which he offers no correction. Knowing that these people are enduring things, look at which descriptors he picks for this letter. Thus says the first and the last, the one who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, but you are rich. Don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Verse 10, be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. It's precisely the churches where death is a real possibility, where suffering is a real condition, where Jesus reminds what he himself went through on behalf of the church. Jesus is not speaking comforting words in a vacuum. Jesus was faithful in his witness to the point of death, and he can promise a crown of life because he himself has received it and being raised forevermore from the dead. Contrast this church, Smyrna, where they look poor, but Jesus says you're rich, with the church at Laodicea. The church of Laodicea, man, it's the Hilton of the churches in Revelation. Everything seems to be going well, and yet Jesus has a staunch word of rebuke for them. I know your works, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I am going to vomit you out of my mouth. For you say I'm rich, the exact opposite of Smyrna. I have become wealthy and need nothing, and you don't realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. The church who looked poor, Jesus says you are rich. The church who looked very comfortable and rich, Jesus says you are poor, wretched, pitiful, blind, naked. You don't see things the right way. That's what Revelation is doing. It's peeling back the curtain to give us God's perspective on things then and now. And finally, and we don't have time to really go into this, I'll give one little hint in going back to the letter to the church at Ephesus in chapter 2, verse 7. Let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers or overcomes, I will give him the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of my God. So Jesus knows what's going on with his churches. He offers his perspective, which may not be the same of ours. And he shows that they are tied to a story that began since before the world was even created. The image of the tree of life takes us all the way back to Genesis, where things went wrong. It points forward to the tree of Calvary, where Jesus was crucified to make things right. And it looks ahead to Revelation 22, the new heavens and the new earth that we'll discuss more in days to come. We're out of time for today, but I hope this helps you as you read those letters. Keep reading, reflecting, and responding, and we'll continue in Revelation tomorrow. God bless.